Staff Sergeant Anthony Wilson checked his watch for the third time in the last 10 minutes. His flight had landed 2 hours late, and now he was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. The graduation ceremony would start in less than 30 minutes. He drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, willing the cars ahead to move faster. Come on, he muttered, peering ahead to see what was causing the delay. A fender bender had reduced 3 lanes to 1, and everyone was crawling past the scene. Anthony hadn't seen his son Michael in 14 months. 14 months of video calls that cut out halfway through. 14 months of missing basketball games and parent-teacher conferences. 14 months of being a ghost in his son's life, but not today. Today, he would be there. When Anthony had received his deployment orders to Afghanistan, Michael was still struggling with algebra and spending weekends playing video games with friends. Now his son was graduating high school with honors and heading to Stanford on a scholarship. The boy had become a man during Anthony's absence, and this milestone was one that Anthony had promised himself and his son that he wouldn't miss. Military discount. The dry cleaner had asked yesterday when Anthony picked up his freshly pressed dress blues. Yes, sir, Anthony had replied, handing over his military ID. Special occasion? Anthony couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. My son's graduating high school tomorrow. The old man behind the counter had nodded approvingly. He must be proud to have a Marine for a father. Anthony had thought about that as he drove away. Was Michael proud? Or was he resentful of the birthdays and holidays his father had missed? The conversations they hadn't had? The guidance Anthony couldn't provide from thousands of miles away? His wife Lisa had assured him that Michael understood, that he respected his father's service. But Anthony knew that understanding and acceptance were different things. Now, as traffic finally began to move, Anthony felt the familiar weight of guilt pressed down on his chest. He'd sacrificed so much time with his family for his country. 15 years of service had taken him to Iraq, Afghanistan, and various training facilities across the globe. He'd missed the birth of his daughter. He'd missed his father's funeral. And he'd missed watching his son grow from a boy into the young man who would walk across the stage today. The GPS announced that he would arrive at North Ridge High School in 8 minutes. Anthony checked his uniform in the rearview mirror. His ribbons and medals were perfectly aligned. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon, each telling a story of sacrifice and service. His white gloves were spotless, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Marines took pride in their appearance, especially in dress blues, and today was no exception. As he pulled into the school parking lot, Anthony noticed it was nearly full. He found a spot at the far end and quickly made his way toward the gymnasium, where the ceremony would be held. The late May heat was intense, and he could feel sweat forming under his uniform, but his pace never slowed. The letter from Michael had arrived 3 months ago. It was brief. His son had never been one for lengthy expressions of emotion. But the invitation was clear. Graduation is May 24th at 2 p.m. I know you're busy, but it would mean a lot if you could make it. Anthony had immediately begun the process of requesting leave. His commanding officer, understanding the importance of the occasion, had approved it without hesitation. Family comes first, Wilson, he'd said. We can manage without you for a week. Now, as Anthony approached the gymnasium, he could see a line of people still filing in through the main doors. He checked his watch again. 5 minutes until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He'd made it. Just barely, but he'd made it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Lisa. Where are you? They're about to start. He quickly typed back, just arriving. Save me a seat. Lisa had arrived earlier with their daughter Ashley to get good seats. Anthony had planned to join them, but his delayed flight had changed those plans. Now he just hoped he could find them in the crowd. As he walked across the parking lot, Anthony thought about what he would say to Michael after the ceremony. He'd rehearsed various speeches during the long flight home, but none seemed adequate. How do you compress 14 months of pride and love into a few sentences? How do you apologize for missing so much, while also celebrating what your child has accomplished without you? The gymnasium doors were now in sight, and Anthony quickened his pace. He could hear the muffled sounds of the school band playing what was probably Pomp and Circumstance. The ceremony might have already started. A memory flashed in his mind. Michael at 7 years old, dressed in a too big Halloween costume designed to look like Marine dress blues. I want to be like you, Dad, he'd said. saluting with his left hand instead of his right. Anthony had gently corrected him, kneeling down to move his small hand to the proper position. "Like this, son," he'd said. "But you know you can be anything you want to be." Michael had looked up at him with serious eyes. "I know, but I want to be brave like you." Anthony had hugged him then, fighting back unexpected tears. "You already are brave, buddy. Braver than you know." Now, 15 years later, Michael was heading to college to study engineering, not following in his father's military footsteps, but forging his own path. And Anthony couldn't be prouder. He reached the gymnasium doors just as an administrator was about to close them. "Cutting it close," the woman said with a smile, holding the door open. "Thank you," Anthony replied, stepping into the air-conditioned building. "I didn't want to miss this." Inside, the gymnasium was transformed. Rows of chairs filled the floor where basketball games were usually played. A stage had been set up at one end, decorated with the school colors of blue and gold. The bleachers on both sides were packed with families. The graduating seniors in their blue caps and gowns sat in neat rows at the front. Anthony scanned the crowd, looking for Lisa and Ashley. The gymnasium was packed, with hardly any empty seats visible. The principal was already at the podium, welcoming everyone to the graduation ceremony for the class of 2025. Anthony stood at the back, still searching for his family. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Lisa. "We're in the middle section, about halfway down. Look for Ashley's pink dress." He spotted them finally. Lisa was waving discreetly, pointing to an empty seat they had saved beside them. But to reach them, Anthony would have to walk down the center aisle during the principal's speech. He hesitated, not wanting to disrupt the ceremony. The principal's voice echoed through the sound system. "Today marks not just the end of your high school journey, but the beginning of the rest of your lives." Anthony decided to wait for a transition moment before making his way to his family. He stood tall in his dress blues, drawing a few curious glances from nearby attendees. A young boy a few rows back pointed at him, whispering something to his mother. Anthony smiled at the child and returned his attention to the stage. From his position, he could just make out the back of Michael's head in the fourth row of graduates. His son sat straight-backed and attentive, a posture that reminded Anthony of himself. Pride swelled in his chest. Despite all the absences, despite the missed moments and long-distance parenting, Michael had turned out well. Better than well. He had excelled academically, participated in sports and clubs, and earned a scholarship to one of the best universities in the country. And he had done it all while his father was thousands of miles away, serving a country that often forgot about the families left behind. Anthony thought about all the other military kids in similar situations. Children who grew up with deployment countdowns and homecoming celebrations. Kids who learned to be brave not by choice but by necessity. He thought about the strength it took to be the family of a service member. A different kind of courage than what was required on the battlefield, but courage nonetheless. The principal finished her welcome address and the school choir stood to perform. This was Anthony's chance. As music filled the gymnasium, he began to make his way toward Lisa and Ashley, nodding apologetically to those he had to pass. When he reached his family, Ashley's face lit up. At 12 years old, she still looked at her father like he hung the moon. Lisa squeezed his hand as he sat down, her eyes saying everything words couldn't. "You made it. I promised I would," he whispered back. As the choir sang about new beginnings and bright futures, Anthony's eyes never left the back of his son's head. In just a few minutes, Michael would walk across that stage, accept his diploma, and take the first step into adulthood. And Anthony would be there to see it. After 14 months, thousands of miles, and too many missed moments to count, he would witness this one important milestone. The choir finished their song, and the crowd applauded. Anthony joined in, his white-gloved hands coming together with purpose. Whatever happened next, with the ceremony, with his relationship with Michael, with his military career, at least he had made it here today. He had kept his promise. And in the life of a Marine who had broken too many promises to his family over the years, that meant everything. Anthony sat between his wife Lisa and daughter Ashley, watching as the school principal continued her speech about bright futures and new beginnings. He checked his watch, only 15 minutes late. Not bad considering his flight delay in the traffic. He had made it in time to see Michael walk across the stage, and that was all that mattered. The gymnasium was packed to capacity. Proud families filled every available seat, many holding bouquets of flowers or balloons. The air was thick with perfume, aftershave, and the unmistakable scent of excitement. Camera flashes popped throughout the crowd as parents tried to capture every moment of this milestone event. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "He doesn't know you're here." "I wanted it to be a surprise." Anthony smiled and squeezed her hand. Michael had been told that his father would try to make it, but that military schedules were unpredictable. The thought of seeing the surprise on his son's face when he spotted him in the crowd made Anthony's heart swell. The principal finally finished her speech and introduced the valedictorian. As the young woman took her place at the podium, Anthony shifted in his seat, trying to get comfortable in his dress blues. The uniform wasn't made for sitting in cramped bleachers, but he wouldn't have worn anything else today. The dress blues represented everything he had sacrificed for: his country, his principles, and yes, time with his family. A young usher walked down the aisle, counting available seats. The gym had reached capacity and people were still trying to enter. Fire regulations were strict about how many could be in the building at once. Anthony noticed 2 security guards standing at the back entrance, turning away latecomers with apologetic shrugs. The valedictorian's speech was mercifully brief, filled with the usual reflections on friendship and the future. Anthony found his attention wandering, focusing instead on the graduates in their blue caps and gowns. He tried to pick out Michael from the back, but they all looked so similar from this angle. Ashley tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "are you staying for the whole week?" "Absolutely," he whispered back. "I don't have to report back to base until next Wednesday." His daughter's face lit up. 6 whole days with her father, the longest stretch they'd had together in over a year. Anthony felt a pang of guilt. At 12, Ashley was at an age where she needed her father around. She was starting to navigate the complicated waters of middle school, of changing friendships and increasing academic pressure, and he had missed so much of it. The sound of applause pulled Anthony from his thoughts. The valedictorian had finished, and now the school band was beginning to play. The principal returned to the podium and announced that they would begin handing out diplomas. Anthony straightened in his seat. This was the moment he had traveled thousands of miles to see. "When I call your name," the principal said, "please come to the stage to receive your diploma." The ceremony proceeded alphabetically, starting with Adams. Anthony calculated that it would be a while before they reached the W's. He settled in for the wait, listening as name after name was called, each followed by cheers from different sections of the gymnasium. 20 minutes into the diploma ceremony, Anthony felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find an usher leaning down toward him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we need you to move," the young man said. "There's been some confusion with the seating." Anthony furrowed his brow. "Move? I'm here with my family to see my son graduate." Lisa looked confused as well. "We saved this seat specifically for him," she told the usher. "He's just arrived from overseas deployment to be here." The usher looked uncomfortable. "I understand, ma'am, but I've been told that there's an issue with capacity. If you could come with me, sir." Anthony exchanged a look with Lisa. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly but quietly. "My son is about to graduate and I've come too far to miss it." The usher hesitated, then nodded and retreated up the aisle, presumably to report back to whoever had sent him. Anthony turned his attention back to the ceremony, but he could feel a knot forming in his stomach. Something wasn't right. A few minutes later, the usher returned, but this time he had 2 security guards with him. These weren't school employees. They wore the uniform of a private security company hired for the event. Both men were tall and broad-shouldered, with stern expressions that suggested they were used to being obeyed. "Sir," the first guard said, leaning down to speak to Anthony, "we need you to come with us." "Please," Anthony remained calm. "May I ask why?" "I'm here to see my son graduate." The guard glanced around the crowded gymnasium. "We have a capacity issue, and we've been asked to remove some of the attendees who arrived late." Lisa spoke up. "He's not just an attendee. He's a parent of a graduate and a Marine who just returned from deployment." The second guard seemed unmoved. "I understand, ma'am, but rules are rules. The fire marshal is strict about capacity." Anthony noticed that several other families nearby were watching the exchange with interest. He didn't want to cause a scene, not on Michael's big day, but he also wasn't going to miss seeing his son accept his diploma. Look, Anthony said, keeping his voice level. My son doesn't know I'm here. It's a surprise. I've been away for 14 months and I promised him I would be here. I'm not leaving. The first guard's expression hardened. Sir, I need you to come with me now. He placed a hand on Anthony's shoulder, a gesture that was both unnecessary and disrespectful. Anthony stiffened but remained seated. Take your hand off me, please. The guard removed his hand but didn't back down. Sir, if you don't come willingly, we'll have to escort you out. By now, several rows of people had turned to watch what was happening. The ceremony continued on stage, unaware of the confrontation in the middle section of the gymnasium. Why him? Asked an older woman seated nearby. There are plenty of people standing at the back. Why are you singling out this man in uniform? The second guard ignored her question. Sir, final warning. Come with us now. Anthony looked at Lisa, who had tears of anger in her eyes. Ashley looked frightened, clutching her father's arm as if she could prevent him from being taken away. After missing so much time with them, the thought of being removed from this important moment was unbearable. I'm going to need to speak to whoever's in charge, Anthony said firmly. There's no reason for me to be singled out here. The first guard leaned in closer. The person in charge sent us specifically for you, he said, his voice low. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Anthony's jaw tightened. In 15 years of military service, he had faced insurgents, survived firefights, and led men through the most dangerous regions on Earth. But here, in his son's high school gymnasium, he felt truly ambushed. This isn't right, Lisa said, her voice trembling with emotion. This is discrimination, plain and simple. The guard's expression didn't change. Ma'am, we're just doing our job. At that moment, a man in a suit, presumably a school administrator, approached the group. He looked concerned by the confrontation unfolding in the middle of the graduation ceremony. What seems to be the problem here? He asked quietly. Before Anthony could explain, the first guard spoke. Sir, we've been instructed to remove this individual due to capacity issues. The administrator looked confused. Instructed by whom? I'm the vice principal, and I haven't given any such order. The second guard pulled the administrator aside, speaking too quietly for Anthony to hear. Whatever was said, the administrator's expression changed from confusion to reluctant acceptance. Staff Sergeant, the vice principal said, returning to Anthony. I apologize for the confusion, but it seems there has been a complaint about disruption. Disruption, Anthony repeated, bewildered. I've been sitting here quietly with my family. It's your uniform, Lisa said suddenly, realization dawning on her face. Someone complained about your uniform. Anthony looked down at his dress blues, at the medals he had earned serving his country. The thought that someone would find his uniform objectionable, that someone would want him removed because of it, was incomprehensible. Is that true? He asked the vice principal. The man looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss the nature of the complaint. I'm just trying to resolve this situation peacefully. By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of even more people. Whispers rippled through nearby rows. On stage, the principal had reached the K's in the alphabet, steadily moving toward Michael's moment. I'm not leaving, Anthony said again, this time loud enough for those around him to hear clearly. I've missed too much of my son's life because I've been serving this country. I will not miss this. The first guard moved forward, clearly intending to physically remove Anthony if necessary. But before he could, something unexpected happened. A man seated a few rows back stood up. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a button-up shirt. But there was something unmistakably military in his bearing. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice carrying a natural authority. The guards turned, momentarily distracted from Anthony. This doesn't concern you, sir, the first guard said. Please return to your seat. The man didn't sit down. Instead, he moved into the aisle, revealing that he wasn't alone. 5 other men rose from various spots in the same row, each with the same disciplined posture and alert eyes. Anthony recognized what these men were immediately, even in civilian clothes. He had worked with their kind before during joint operations overseas. Navy SEALs, the quiet professionals, the elite of the elite. The first man approached the guards, his manner calm but resolute. The 2 guards suddenly seemed less confident, faced with 6 men who clearly knew how to handle themselves. I think there's been a misunderstanding, the SEAL said, his voice reasonable but firm. This Marine is here to see his son graduate. He's not leaving. The confrontation had reached a tipping point. In the background, the principal continued calling names, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the stands. The guards looked at each other, then at the 6 men who had risen to Anthony's defense. Whatever happened next would determine whether Anthony Wilson would see his son receive his diploma or be escorted from the building on what should have been one of the proudest days of his life. The gymnasium had grown strangely quiet in their immediate vicinity. Despite the ongoing ceremony, the first SEAL stood directly between Anthony and the security guards, his stance casual but his eyes alert. He wasn't physically imposing in the way the guards were. He was of average height with a lean build. But there was something in his presence that commanded attention. "Let me introduce myself," the SEAL said, extending his hand to the guards. "Lieutenant Commander Thomas Reynolds, United States Navy." The guards looked at his hand but didn't shake it. "And these are my colleagues," Reynolds continued, gesturing to the 5 men who had joined him. They had positioned themselves strategically, not aggressively, but in a way that made their unified presence clear. The first guard shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we have our orders, and I respect that," Reynolds interrupted smoothly. "But I think we need to consider what's happening here. This is Staff Sergeant Wilson, a Marine who has been serving overseas for over a year. He's here to see his son graduate. On what grounds exactly are you asking him to leave?" The second guard glanced at his partner, then at the vice principal, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "It's a fire code violation," the guard insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're over capacity." Reynolds looked pointedly around the gymnasium. Several people were standing at the back, and a few seats were actually empty in other sections. "Interesting that out of everyone here, you've singled out a man in uniform who arrived only minutes late due to his flight from overseas." One of the other SEALs, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair, stepped forward. "Chief Petty Officer William Davis," he said by way of introduction. "I couldn't help but notice that several people have entered after the staff sergeant, yet they weren't approached." The vice principal cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, this is becoming disruptive. Perhaps we should..." "Disruptive?" Anthony finally spoke up, his voice controlled but firm. "I've been sitting here quietly with my family. The only disruption began when these guards tried to remove me from my son's graduation for no valid reason." By now, people in several surrounding rows were watching openly, some with phones raised recording the confrontation. On stage, the principal had reached the M surnames, still unaware of the situation developing in the stands. The third SEAL, a younger man with watchful eyes, addressed the vice principal directly. "Sir, with all due respect, this doesn't look good for your school. A decorated Marine being removed from his son's graduation while we're literally celebrating these kids' futures that are secure because of people like Staff Sergeant Wilson." Lisa stood up beside her husband. "My son doesn't know his father is here. We kept it a surprise because we weren't sure if his leave would be approved in time. Can you imagine how he'll feel if he looks out and doesn't see his father in the crowd?" Ashley, still clutching her father's arm, looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Please don't make my dad leave." The vice principal looked genuinely conflicted now. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and sighed. The complaint came from someone who said they felt uncomfortable with military presence at a civilian event. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the people close enough to hear. Reynolds shook his head slowly. "Sir, that's not a valid reason to remove someone from a public event. That's discrimination, plain and simple." "I've missed birthdays," Anthony said quietly. "I've missed Christmases. I've missed his basketball games and science fairs. I am not missing this." The fourth SEAL, a man with a weathered face and steady gaze, had been observing silently. Now he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I suggest a compromise. If the concern is about disruption, let's all return to our seats and watch these young people graduate in peace. The ceremony is halfway done already." The guards looked to the vice principal for direction. The man was clearly torn between following whatever instructions he'd been given and avoiding what was quickly becoming a public relations nightmare. From 3 rows back, an elderly man stood up shakily, leaning on a cane for support. "I fought in Vietnam," he called out, his voice wavering but determined. "And I'm telling you, anyone who has a problem with a man in uniform at his own son's graduation has a problem with me too." Another voice joined in from several rows over. My daughter is serving in the Air Force right now. She couldn't be here today for her brother's graduation. Are you saying she wouldn't be welcome either? The mood in their section of the gymnasium was shifting rapidly. What had begun as a quiet attempt to remove one man was evolving into a moment of collective indignation. The fifth SEAL, who had remained silent until now, spoke directly to the security guards. You have a choice to make here, gentlemen. This can end quietly, with everyone back in their seats enjoying the ceremony, or it can become something much bigger than I think any of us wants today. The first guard's radio crackled to life. A voice on the other end asked for a status update. The guard stepped away from the group to respond, speaking in hushed tones. While this was happening, Reynolds turned to Anthony. Which one is your son? He asked quietly. Anthony pointed toward the graduates. Michael Wilson, 4th row. Blue gown like the rest, but he's wearing special honor cords for his academic achievements. Reynolds nodded. My daughter's graduating today too. Jessica Reynolds. They've been in AP Physics together this year. This personal connection seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. No longer was this simply about principal. It was about parents watching their children achieve a milestone. The guard returned from his radio conversation. His demeanor noticeably changed. We've been instructed to return to our posts, he said stiffly. Sir, you can remain for now. The vice principal looked relieved. Excellent. Now can we all please return to our seats? We're missing the ceremony. But before anyone could move, the sixth SEAL, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke. Not so fast, he said. His voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable note of command. I want to be very clear about what happened here today. Everyone turned to look at him. He was the oldest of the group, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily ruffled by a confrontation like this. My name is Commander James Blackwood, he said. I've served this country for 27 years. I've lost friends defending the very freedoms that allow us all to be here today. Staff Sergeant Wilson has done the same. He looked directly at the guards. So before we all sit down and pretend this didn't happen, I want your names and the name of whoever gave you these instructions. The guards exchanged glances. The first one started to object, but Blackwood cut him off. This isn't a request. This is accountability. Someone made a decision today that dishonors the sacrifice of every service member in this room and beyond. That doesn't just go away with an oops, never mind. The vice principal stepped between them. Commander, please. Let's not escalate this further. The issue is resolved. Staff Sergeant Wilson can stay. It's not resolved, Blackwood replied calmly. It's paused. There's a difference. On stage, the principal had reached the S surnames. They were getting closer to Michael's turn. Reynolds placed a hand on Blackwood's shoulder. Jim, let's table this for now. These kids deserve their moment. For a tense second, it seemed like Blackwood might refuse. Then he nodded once sharply. After the ceremony, he said to the guards. We'll continue this discussion after the ceremony. The guards backed away, returning to their posts at the doors. The vice principal hurried back to his seat near the stage. The six SEALs returned to their row, and Anthony sat back down with Lisa and Ashley. As the confrontation dispersed, something unexpected happened. The elderly Vietnam veteran remained standing. Slowly, using his cane for support, he raised his right hand in a solemn salute directed at Anthony. Across the gymnasium, another man stood and saluted, then another. One by one, veterans throughout the crowd rose, each offering the same gesture of respect and solidarity. Anthony stood and returned the salute, his back straight, his white-gloved hand precisely at his brow. It was a moment of silent understanding between those who had served, an acknowledgement of shared sacrifice that transcended words. The principal, finally noticing the movement in the crowd, paused in her reading of names. She looked out at the gymnasium, at the scattered individuals standing at attention, and seemed to realize that something significant was happening. In that moment of hushed respect, with the ceremony temporarily paused, Anthony felt a swell of emotion in his chest. This was why he served, not for recognition or gratitude, but for moments like this, when ordinary people stood together for something bigger than themselves. The salutes ended and people returned to their seats. The principal, after a momentary hesitation, continued calling graduates to receive their diplomas. Lisa squeezed Anthony's hand. You okay? She whispered. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. The confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. After facing danger in war zones, he hadn't expected to be made to feel unwelcome at his own son's graduation. Reynolds leaned forward from his seat behind Anthony. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "my team and I are here for Lieutenant Blake's daughter's graduation. But we've got your six today." Anthony turned slightly and nodded his thanks. The SEAL's intervention had likely prevented the situation from becoming much worse. There was a bond between service members that civilians often didn't understand, a willingness to stand up for each other without hesitation. Surnames were being called now. They were getting close to Michael's turn. Anthony took a deep breath and focused on the stage. After everything that had happened, he refused to miss this moment. Ashley tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "Michael's looking this way." Anthony followed his daughter's gaze and saw his son scanning the crowd from his seat with the graduates. The young man's eyes moved across the gymnasium, searching, hoping, and then their eyes met. Even from a distance, Anthony could see the moment of recognition, the widening of Michael's eyes, the disbelief quickly replaced by joy. Michael hadn't expected him to make it. Despite Anthony's promises, years of unavoidable absences had taught his son not to count on his father's presence. But this time, Anthony had kept his promise. Despite flight delays, despite traffic, despite the guards' attempt to remove him, he was here in uniform, watching proudly as his son prepared to cross from childhood into the future. Michael's face broke into a wide grin. He gave a small wave, trying to maintain his composure among his classmates. Anthony returned the wave, his white glove visible even from a distance. Surnames were being called now. Just a few more minutes until Wilson. The gymnasium felt different now. The confrontation had created a ripple effect, a heightened awareness of something important happening in their midst. People who had been half paying attention, scrolling through phones or chatting quietly, were now fully present, watching each graduate with renewed appreciation. Anthony settled back in his seat, the weight of his medals against his chest a reminder of everything that had brought him to this moment. The ceremony continued, moving inexorably toward the moment when his son's name would be called. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Anthony Wilson would be there to witness it. The guards had tried to take this moment from him, but thanks to 6 Navy SEALs and a gymnasium full of people who understood the importance of standing up for what's right, he was exactly where he belonged. The principal's voice echoed through the gymnasium as she reached the end of the alphabet. "Kevin Thompson, Alicia Turner, Justin Vance." Anthony sat up straighter, his heart beating faster. They were getting closer to Michael's moment. After everything that had happened, the confrontation with the guards, the intervention of the SEALs, the spontaneous show of respect from veterans throughout the crowd, this was what truly mattered. His son was about to walk across that stage and receive his diploma. Rebecca Walters, David Washington. Lisa gripped Anthony's hand tightly. Ashley leaned forward in her seat, camera ready to capture her brother's big moment. Michael Wilson. A burst of applause erupted from their section of the bleachers. Anthony stood up, unable to contain himself, clapping proudly as his son rose from his seat and made his way to the stage. Michael walked with confidence, his honor cord swinging slightly with each step. From a distance, Anthony could see that his son was beaming. Michael climbed the short stairs to the stage and approached the principal. As he reached for his diploma, he turned his head toward the audience, his eyes searching for his family. Anthony raised his white-gloved hand in a small wave, and Michael's smile widened even further. Something unexpected happened then. Instead of simply handing Michael his diploma and moving on to the next graduate, the principal paused. She leaned toward the microphone and said, "I understand your father has just returned from overseas deployment to be here today." The gymnasium grew quiet. Michael nodded, looking slightly surprised by the announcement. "Staff Sergeant Wilson," the principal continued, "would you please stand and be recognized?" Anthony hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden attention. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it, really. This day was supposed to be about Michael, not him. Reynolds leaned forward from his seat. "Stand tall, Marine," he said quietly. Anthony rose to his feet, standing at attention in his dress blues. The medals on his chest caught the light, each one telling a story of service and sacrifice that most people in the room would never fully understand. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then building to a thunderous ovation. People throughout the gymnasium stood, their applause carrying a message that went beyond mere politeness. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, a thank you. Michael stood on stage, diploma in hand, looking at his father with undisguised pride. The principal gestured for him to wait a moment before returning to his seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, "I've just been informed of a situation that occurred during our ceremony. It appears there was an attempt to remove Staff Sergeant Wilson from his son's graduation." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I want to make it absolutely clear that this was not authorized by school administration and does not reflect the values of Northridge High School. We honor and respect the service of all military personnel, and we especially welcome parents who have sacrificed so much to be here today." The applause grew even louder. Anthony remained standing at attention, his expression composed despite the emotion welling in his chest. This moment of public acknowledgement was healing something he hadn't realized was wounded. The quiet fear that his sacrifices weren't valued, that his absences from his children's lives had been for nothing. The principal turned to Michael, who was still standing beside her. "Your father has traveled a very long way to be here today. Would you like to say hello?" Michael hesitated only a moment before nodding. He stepped to the microphone, cleared his throat, and said simply, "Thanks for making it. Dad, I love you." Those 7 words, direct, unembellished, genuine, hit Anthony with the force of a physical blow. His son wasn't one for public displays of emotion, making these words all the more powerful. Anthony broke his position of attention long enough to place his hand over his heart and nod to his son. It was a gesture that contained everything he couldn't say aloud: his pride, his love, his regret for the moments missed, his joy at being present for this one. Michael returned to his seat among the graduates, and the principal continued calling names. The ceremony proceeded, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the gymnasium. A current of emotion ran through the crowd, a shared understanding of what had just transpired. When the last graduate had received their diploma, the principal addressed the audience once more. "Before we conclude our ceremony, I'd like to invite all veterans and active duty military personnel in attendance to stand and be recognized." Throughout the gymnasium, people rose to their feet, men and women of various ages, some in uniform like Anthony, others in civilian clothes. The 6 SEALs stood as well, their bearing unmistakable even in jeans and button-up shirts. "These individuals," the principal said, "have dedicated their lives to serving our country. Many have missed important moments with their families, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and yes, even graduations, because they were deployed far from home. Today we honor not only their service but also the sacrifices made by their families." The audience applauded once more, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Anthony remained at attention, but he allowed his gaze to move across the gymnasium, taking in the other service members standing proudly. There was a silent communication between them, a shared understanding that didn't require words. When the applause finally died down, the principal announced that the ceremony had concluded. The graduates tossed their caps into the air, a cloud of blue against the ceiling of the gymnasium. Cheers erupted as families began making their way toward their graduates. Anthony turned to Lisa and Ashley. "Let's go find Michael," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As they began to make their way down from the bleachers, Reynolds approached. "Staff Sergeant," he said, extending his hand. "That was quite a ceremony." Anthony shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Reynolds waved off the gratitude. "We take care of our own." He gestured to the other SEALs who had gathered nearby. "None of us could have sat by and watched that happen." Commander Blackwood, the oldest of the SEALs, stepped forward. "We still need to address what happened here today," he said, his voice low. "Someone gave those guards instructions to remove you specifically." Anthony nodded. "I appreciate that, Commander, but right now I just want to see my son." Blackwood seemed to understand. "Of course, family first, but this isn't over." The crowd was pressing in around them now, families eager to reach their graduates. Anthony caught sight of the 2 security guards standing near the exit, looking uncomfortable as they observed the scene. The vice principal was speaking to them, his expression serious. "Dad!" Michael's voice cut through the crowd. Anthony turned to see his son pushing his way toward them. still in his graduation gown, diploma clutched in one hand. When Michael reached them, he hesitated for just a moment before throwing his arms around his father. Anthony hugged him tightly, not caring about protocol or the proper way to behave in uniform. This was his son, his brilliant, resilient son who had grown into a young man while Anthony was defending their country halfway around the world. "You made it?" Michael said, his voice muffled against Anthony's shoulder. "I promised I would," Anthony replied. Michael pulled back, looking at his father with shining eyes. "When they tried to make you leave, I saw it from where I was sitting. I couldn't hear what was happening, but I could tell something was wrong." "It's handled," Anthony assured him. "Nothing was going to make me miss this moment." Michael turned to Reynolds and the other SEALs who were standing a respectful distance away. "Are these the guys who helped?" Anthony nodded. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and his team. They were here for another graduate. Michael approached the SEALs, hand extended. "Sir, I want to thank you for standing up for my dad." Reynolds shook Michael's hand. "Your father would have done the same for any of us. That's how it works." As Michael spoke with the SEALs, the principal made her way through the crowd toward Anthony. She looked both concerned and determined. "Staff Sergeant Wilson," she said when she reached him, "I want to personally apologize for what happened today. It was unacceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed." Anthony nodded. "I appreciate that, ma'am. We've identified the individual who made the complaint," she continued, lowering her voice. "It was a parent who has expressed problematic views in the past. The security company should never have acted on it without consulting school administration first." Anthony wasn't surprised. In 15 years of service, he had encountered prejudice before, sometimes overt, sometimes subtle. What had surprised him was the immediate and powerful response from others in the gymnasium. The SEALs, the veterans, ordinary people who recognized an injustice and refused to remain silent. "What matters," Anthony said, "is that I got to see my son graduate. Everything else is secondary." The principal smiled. "Your son is an exceptional young man, Staff Sergeant. You should be very proud." "I am," Anthony replied, looking over at Michael, who was still chatting animatedly with the SEALs. "Every single day." As the gymnasium slowly emptied, families moving outside for photos and celebrations, Anthony found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Parents of other graduates approached to express their support. Veterans came to share brief words of camaraderie, and several teachers made a point of telling him how outstanding Michael had been as a student. Through it all, Anthony maintained his composure, thanking people politely but keeping his focus on his family. This was their time together, precious days that would pass all too quickly before he had to return to his unit. The elderly Vietnam veteran who had been the first to stand and salute made his way over, moving slowly with his cane. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice gravelly with age, "what happened here today, that disrespect? It reminds me of how things were when we came home." He shook his head slowly. "But what happened after, all these people standing up, that's how it should be." Anthony nodded, understanding exactly what the older man meant. "Times have changed," he said. "Not enough," the veteran replied, "but maybe a little. You take care of that boy of yours. He looks like he's got a good head on his shoulders." "He does," Anthony agreed. "Better than mine at his age, that's for sure." The old man chuckled. "Isn't that what we all hope for? That our kids will be better than we were?" As the veteran moved away, Anthony felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Commander Blackwood standing there, his expression serious. "We need to talk about what happens next," Blackwood said without preamble. "This can't go unanswered." Anthony looked at his family, Lisa chatting with other parents, Ashley taking photos of Michael with his friends, Michael himself laughing and celebrating, diploma in hand. This was what mattered. This was what he had fought for. "Commander," Anthony said, "I appreciate your concern, but right now I just want to enjoy these few days with my family." Blackwood studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. But this isn't just about you, Staff Sergeant. It's about making sure nothing like this happens to the next guy in uniform who shows up late to his kid's event." Anthony knew Blackwood was right. What had happened today was bigger than one Marine at one graduation ceremony. It was about respect, about values, about standing up for what was right. "After the weekend," Anthony said finally, "let me have this time with my family. Then we'll address it." Blackwood seemed satisfied with this compromise. "Monday morning, then. We'll be in touch." As Blackwood rejoined his team, Anthony turned back to his family. Michael was approaching, having shed his graduation gown to reveal a crisp shirt and tie underneath. "Dad," he said, "everyone's heading to Riverside Park for photos. Can we go?" Anthony smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Lead the way, graduate. This is your day." Together they walked toward the exit, past the security guards who now stood with downcast eyes, past the vice principal who was deep in conversation with the security company supervisor, past the spot where 6 Navy SEALs had stood up for a principle that transcended personal interest. Outside, the late May sunshine was brilliant, casting long shadows across the school grounds. Families gathered in happy clusters, taking photos and making plans for celebration dinners. The air was filled with laughter and congratulations. Anthony Wilson walked with his family, his dress blues standing out among the crowd of civilians. But unlike earlier, he felt no need to explain or defend his presence. He belonged here, not just as a Marine, not just as a visitor briefly home from deployment, but as a father witnessing one of the most important days in his son's life. And for now, for these few precious days, that was all that mattered. Monday morning arrived too quickly. The weekend had passed in a blur of celebration, family meals, and precious time together. Anthony had savored every moment, helping Michael sort through graduation gifts, listening to his son talk excitedly about Stanford in the fall, watching movies with Ashley, and simply being present in a way that deployment rarely allowed. Now, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt, Anthony sat in a conference room at Northridge High School. The table was crowded. Principal Diane Carter sat at the head, flanked by the superintendent and the school board president. The vice principal, Robert Chen, was there too, looking considerably more uncomfortable than he had during the graduation ceremony. On Anthony's right sat Commander Blackwood, still in civilian clothes but somehow managing to look every inch the naval officer he was. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds had joined them as well, representing the other SEALs who had intervened. Across the table sat 2 representatives from the security company, along with their legal counsel. They had been mostly silent so far, speaking only when directly addressed. "Let me be absolutely clear," Principal Carter was saying, her voice firm and measured. "What happened at our graduation ceremony was unacceptable on every level. Staff Sergeant Wilson was a parent attending his son's graduation after returning from overseas deployment. The attempt to remove him was discriminatory, disrespectful, and completely contrary to the values we teach at this school." The security company's senior representative, a man named Phillips, cleared his throat. "As we've stated, our employees were responding to a complaint that should never have been acted upon," the superintendent interrupted. "Your contract with our district specifically states that all security decisions must be cleared through school administration first." Anthony watched the back and forth silently. He hadn't wanted to spend his precious leave time in meetings like this, but Commander Blackwood had been right. This wasn't just about him. It was about making sure nothing like this happened to anyone else. "The parent who made the complaint," Principal Carter continued, "has a history of problematic behavior. She claimed that Staff Sergeant Wilson's uniform was making a political statement and making other parents uncomfortable." Anthony raised an eyebrow but said nothing. His uniform wasn't a political statement, it was his official dress as a United States Marine. It represented years of service, sacrifice, and commitment. "We should note," the security company's lawyer interjected, "that our employees have denied any racial motivation in their actions." Commander Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "No one at this table has mentioned race, Counselor. Interesting that you felt the need to bring it up." The lawyer fell silent, realizing his mistake. The tension in the room was palpable. Reynolds spoke up for the first time. "I think we need to focus on the real issue here. A uniformed service member was singled out and nearly prevented from attending his son's graduation. That's not just a breach of contract between the school and the security company. It's a fundamental failure to respect what that uniform represents." The school board president nodded. "I couldn't agree more. My own son serves in the Army. If someone tried to remove him from a family event because of his uniform, I'd be outraged." Anthony finally broke his silence. "I appreciate everyone's concern, but I want to be clear about my position. I'm not looking for anyone to lose their job over this. I'm not interested in lawsuits or financial compensation." He looked directly at the security company representatives. What I want is accountability, an acknowledgement of what went wrong and concrete steps to make sure it doesn't happen again." Principal Carter smiled slightly. "Staff Sergeant, your restraint is admirable, but there must be consequences here." "There will be," the superintendent assured him. "We've already decided not to renew our contract with this security company for next year's events." Phillips looked alarmed. "That's a significant decision to make based on one incident that was caught on video by multiple parents and has already been viewed over 2 million times online," the vice principal said quietly. "The school's reputation is at stake here." Anthony hadn't been aware of the videos. He'd been too focused on enjoying his time with Michael and the rest of his family to check social media or news sites. The thought of his confrontation being broadcast to millions was unsettling. "What matters to me," Anthony said firmly, "is that this becomes a learning opportunity. Your guards need better training. They need to understand that a military uniform isn't a costume or a political statement. It's an official dress representing service to our country." Commander Blackwood nodded approvingly. "Well said, Staff Sergeant." The meeting continued for another hour, with specific agreements being reached about training, procedures, and public statements. The security company, facing both the loss of their contract and growing public backlash, agreed to everything proposed. As the meeting concluded and people began gathering their things to leave, Reynolds approached Anthony. "Your son heading to Stanford in the fall? That's impressive." Anthony couldn't help the pride that swelled in his chest. "Full academic scholarship? He wants to study engineering." Reynolds smiled. "My daughter too, though she's chosen UCLA instead. They'll be rivals. Friendly ones, I hope," Anthony replied. "The best kind," Reynolds agreed. He hesitated, then said, "Listen, I know you're shipping back out soon. If your family ever needs anything while you're deployed, my team and I are here. That's not just talk, we take care of our own." Anthony extended his hand. "I appreciate that more than I can say." As they left the conference room, Principal Carter pulled Anthony aside. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "After what happened at graduation, several of our students approached me about starting a support group for military families at the school. They want to create a community for kids whose parents are deployed." Anthony was surprised. That's really something." "Your son Michael is leading the initiative," she added. "He said he wants to make sure other students have the support he sometimes wished he had." The revelation hit Anthony hard. Despite his absences, despite the missed moments and long-distance parenting, his son had grown into a young man who thought about others, who wanted to make things better for kids in similar situations. "I didn't know," Anthony said simply. Principal Carter smiled. "He was going to tell you himself, but I thought you should hear it now, before you leave for your meeting at the security company's headquarters." Anthony checked his watch. He had 30 minutes before he needed to be across town for the next meeting, another discussion about accountability and change, this time with the security company's senior management. He thanked the principal and headed out to his car. As he drove through town, his mind was full of everything that had transpired since Friday's graduation ceremony. What had begun as a personal conflict had expanded into something larger, a conversation about respect, about values, about standing up for what was right. His phone rang, and he answered through the car's Bluetooth system. It was Lisa. "How did the meeting go?" she asked. "About as well as it could," Anthony replied. "The school is terminating their contract with the security company, and there's going to be additional training for all security personnel at future events." "Good," Lisa said firmly. "And how are you doing with all this attention?" "Michael says the video has gone viral," Anthony sighed. "I'm still processing that part. I never wanted to be the center of a viral moment. I just wanted to see our son graduate." "Well, you're handling it with grace," Lisa told him. "Michael is so proud of you. Not just for standing your ground at graduation, but for how you're dealing with everything afterward." The mention of Michael brought Principal Carter's revelation to mind. "Did you know that Michael is starting a support group for military kids at the school?" There was a pause before Lisa answered. "He mentioned the idea a few weeks ago, but I didn't know he'd actually gone ahead with it." "That's wonderful. Why didn't he tell me?" Anthony asked. Lisa's voice was gentle. "Maybe he wanted to surprise you. Or maybe he wasn't sure how to bring it up. You know how he is. Always worried about seeming like he's complaining about your deployments." Anthony nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see him. Michael had always been careful about that, never wanting Anthony to feel guilty for doing his job, for serving his country. Even as a child, he'd been remarkably understanding about his father's frequent absences. "I'm proud of him," Anthony said. "So damn proud." "He knows," Lisa assured him. "Trust me, he knows." Anthony arrived at the security company's headquarters with a few minutes to spare. As he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed a small group gathered near the entrance. Drawing closer, he recognized Commander Blackwood and the other SEALs from the graduation ceremony, all in civilian clothes but standing with military precision. "What are you all doing here?" Anthony asked as he approached. Blackwood's expression was serious. "Making sure they understand that this isn't just about one Marine at one graduation ceremony. This is about respect for every man and woman who wears the uniform." Anthony was touched by their continued support. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," Reynolds replied simply. Together, they entered the building. The security company's CEO was waiting in the lobby, along with several other executives. Their expressions were solemn, even nervous. "Staff Sergeant Wilson," the CEO said, extending his hand. "We appreciate you coming in today." And he looked uncertainly at the 6 men accompanying Anthony. "Your colleagues as well." "These are friends," Anthony corrected him. "Friends who stood up for what's right when your employees didn't." The meeting that followed was direct and productive. The security company announced a new training program for all employees, focusing on proper respect for military personnel and understanding the significance of the uniform. They revealed plans for a company-wide policy change and a substantial donation to a non-profit supporting military families. Throughout the discussion, Anthony remained measured and thoughtful. He wasn't interested in punishment or retribution, only in preventing similar incidents in the future. As the meeting concluded, the CEO addressed Anthony directly. "Staff Sergeant, on behalf of our entire company, I want to offer our sincere apology for what happened at your son's graduation. It was wrong, and we are committed to doing better." Anthony nodded his acceptance. "Actions speak louder than words, sir. I'll be watching to see those changes implemented." Outside, as they walked back to their cars, Blackwood clapped Anthony on the shoulder. "Well handled, Marine." "Just doing what needed to be done," Anthony replied. "That's what we do," Reynolds said. "Every day in ways big and small." They exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch. The bonds formed through this unexpected experience weren't likely to be broken easily. When Anthony arrived home, he found Michael sitting on the front porch, looking at something on his laptop. His son closed the computer quickly when he saw his father approaching. "How did it go?" Michael asked. "Productive," Anthony replied, sitting down beside him. "Principal Carter told me about your support group for military kids." Michael looked slightly embarrassed. "I was going to tell you. It's just an idea right now, but a lot of students seem interested." "I think it's great," Anthony said. "I'm proud of you for thinking of others." Michael shrugged, but Anthony could tell he was pleased by the praise. "I just kept thinking about how it was for me when you were deployed, especially when I was younger. It would have helped to talk to other kids who understood." Anthony felt a familiar pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't change the past. The birthdays missed, the school events he'd only seen in photos. But he could be fully present now, and he could support his son's efforts to help others. The school agreed to provide a meeting space and faculty support. Michael continued, warming to the topic now. "We're thinking weekly meetings, maybe some special events around holidays, which can be tough for kids with deployed parents."